Want to learn more about a cybersecurity solution, but don't want to talk to sales just to get some preliminaries? Then you need to check out our new podcast, Security You Should Know. Each episode is only about 15 minutes, with 2 security leaders asking the questions you want to know from one security vendor. It's available now wherever you get your podcasts or at CISOseries.com.
CISOs want vendors that can solve problems. So why do so many fail to communicate that?
You're listening to Defense in Depth.
Welcome to Defense in Depth. My name is David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO series. And joining me as actually a guest co-host, because you normally hear him as a co-host, but not on this show, but that's what he's going to do right now. It's Mike Johnson, the CISO of Rivian. Mike, say hello to the audience.
Hello, audience. I'm happy to be guest co-hosting for you today.
So he's not a regular co-host here, but he's a regular co-host somewhere else.
I'm an irregular co-host.
Like when he goes shopping for suits, you go for the irregulars, right?
I definitely go straight for the irregulars.
There you go. Our sponsor for today's episode is Scrut Automation. Stay aware, stay ahead, and stay compliant. Do it all with Scrut. Our guest for today's episode, I'm bringing him in now before I even talk about today's episode. It is the CISO for Dolby, Yaron Levy. Yaron, say hello to the audience.
Hello, audience. Happy to be here again.
All right. Yaron, let me set up the topic you proposed here. So you recently wrote a post on LinkedIn that laid out the issue vexing a lot of CISOs. You want solutions that can solve problems. That sounds unbelievably basic. But what you were finding is that many of these vendors were just kind of filling up a Gartner bingo card. Like Gartner would set up the categories and they would sort of fill those sort of distinctions so they could, appear on a magic quadrant, I would guess. But everyone will tell you what they do, but not what they solve. And this was your complaint. So I want to just get into, can you clearly explain that distinction to us? Why is that important? And why do you believe vendors are not getting this right?
Yes, so I get bombarded all the time by either startup companies or vendors who ask me for feedback on their ID or vendors who try to offer their solution. All of them, I ask the same question. What problem are you trying to solve? Simple. And the reason I ask this question is because it's very efficient. If I have this problem, then I may be curious, to learn more about it and see, how people solve it. But if I don't have it, then I don't want to waste time on it. It's as simple as that. When I think about it as CISOs, the problems that we care about are the risks to our businesses. And these are the ones that we try to find solutions for. So we're not playing bingo. We're just, trying to find solutions for problems we have. So in my post, I said, tell me what problem you're solving. And in response, I received like hundreds of sales pitches and none of them articulated the problems.
Yes, I know. This was actually one of the problems we had when we were putting together the show rundown. But you bring up a very good point. And actually, for our new show, Security You Should Know, this was one of the things that we heard from a lot of CISOs is the one thing we struggle is, and this was the unique distinction, tell us what you do, and then also tell us what you do not do. What is the problem you solve? And then part of that was, how do I explain what you do to my CEO? Which I thought was a very, very good distinction.
100%. Because, then I have to sell it internally if I need to ask for budget or anything. So, yeah, if I can articulate in a way that my boss's boss can understand, then there's no way I can get budget for that.
Where does this effort fall flat?
John Patrick says this: salespeople often lack technical knowledge about their product's limitations, leading to overcommitments just to close a deal. There's often a lack of regular communication about product updates and changes, which can create challenges for effective planning and usage. And Philip Miller of Quirple said, quote, many startups have only a concept with several features and are lacking a cohesive roadmap to addressing a business priority. Sadly, the same challenge exists for sales teams working at some mature, publicly traded security companies. They, too, may lack understanding of how their solution solves a problem. Then the CISO's team often ends up educating the vendor. So what I'm hearing from a lot of this is it doesn't seem like it's a problem-solution-driven effort here. It seems like these are just salespeople trying to work in a machine to just sell the product and, well, heck, the real concerns of the CISOs are lost here. Mike, do you feel that way? And I know there were some generalizations made.
No, I think what you're getting at there, David, is interesting in that a lot of this, it's not necessarily even unique to the security field. This is playbooks that sales teams just use over and over again. They need to get out there. They need to sell. They're more interested in getting the message out, the broadcast, than necessarily what people are looking for. In some ways, it's marketing, but not doing it very well. I think to one of the other comments in here, I do think it's critical that the sales teams need to understand the products that they're selling. It's one thing to just read from a playbook, but if you don't understand what your product is, if you don't understand what it does, you're not going to be able to answer the what problem does it solve question that your own very astutely asks to these folks. But it really does seem like this is just a machine that folks are going from a playbook and they're just putting it out there broadcast and hoping somebody latches on.
You talk to people who are salespeople, like in any industry for them out, they kind of like operate like this. And so that I think that's why there's this feeling. Your own?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the sales team must know what problem the product or service solves, because this is how they can show the value and find out whether the client cares about it or not. So let me give you an example from a different field. Take two salespeople. Let's say one of them come and say, we are an NSAID provider and we provide 200 milligram ibuprofen pink tablets. And then another one comes and say, we provide tablet that makes headaches go away in 20 minutes. Who are you going to talk to? I mean, I don't know what NSAID is. I'm sure it's something in the medical field. And whether it's, 200 milligrams or 400 milligrams, is it better? I don't know. But if somebody comes and say, hey, I have a tablet that will make your headache go away in 20 minutes. Okay, now I'm interested because I have a headache. So I know what the problem they're solving.
I think that's an interesting example because if you compare those two, the former is talking to a very technical audience who knows exactly what those mean. Like that's probably what they're putting out there. They assume that who they're talking to knows what that means. The latter is the more broad, hey, problem, solution, let's talk. What I think is fascinating by that example is I wonder if that's what we're seeing in the security field, in that people are very used to talking to experts. And so they want to meet them where they are. They want to talk as if they're also an expert rather than simplifying it down to what is the problem and I've got the solution.
So you think it's more important that they're seen as an expert rather than I'm trying to sell you, pain medication? Because can I just say, I love the example you used, and I'm just going to use an example. A friend of mine, years ago, I met a friend of mine who had an extremely successful blog. This was when blogs could just make money off of content on the site. I said, what do you blog about? How do you get this? And he goes, he just said pain medication. That's all I do. If I see a pain and I provide a way to solve it through a blog post, that is a successful model. And he just said pain medication. That's it. My job is pain medication. So it seems like this is the way vendors should look at CISOs. Be pain medication. Yes? What do you think?
Yeah, because we're trying to solve problems and pains that we have. That's essentially what we're trying to do. And, I think our field became so complex over the years. It's so difficult for us to even keep up with all the different acronyms we have, DSPM and CSPM and ASPM and CTAM. And I'm like, what does it even mean? Like all of that, right? It's really, really hard. And every day we hear like some new acronym.
Yeah. Can I just say, there was a time I felt embarrassed to ask what an acronym is. Now I'm like, oh, it's totally cool because it's far too confusing.
Because they probably just made it up anyway.
Like yesterday.
No one said it would be easy.
Brian Druckenbrod of Newfold Digital said, quote, I love how bold some claims are here. Real world with legacy code bases, tech debt, on-premise environments. How many can really deliver on their promises? The hard part is there isn't really a way to create a guarantee or warranty on the claims. And by the way, this is a whole different story of how do I know if my product's actually doing the thing that it's supposed to do? And that's a whole other discussion. But Tim Golden of Compliance Scorecard said, quote, I'm reminded of my first English writing class in high school. Answer the 5 W's. Who, what, why, where, when, and how in the first paragraph. So this goes back to also my sort of pain medication comment here of, sometimes we're overwhelmed by sort of the fancy pitch and that marketing people are just trying to show their ability to write rather than address the concern of the CISO, the potential buyer? What do you think, Yaron?
Yeah. I like really what Tim said, about the 5 questions and answering those 5 questions. Because it really shows that you really truly understand in your bones what you're doing. And even more so like why you're doing it. Right. So, and I think it's also especially important for startups because, as a founder, if you're going to dedicate the next, 5 to 10 years of your life to work on a problem, you'd better know what you're dedicating your life to. And you need to answer these 5 questions. First and foremost, for yourself, I think it's a must do. There's an interesting book that I read by Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz. It's a large VC in the Valley. It's called The Hard Things About the Hard Things. And he basically described that, every founder has 2 states of mind, euphoria and complete horror. So if you're going to just, live for the next 5-10 years of your life between those 2 mindsets, you should really know very well why you're doing this. I think, especially for startup companies, it's extremely important to know.
Mike, are you in a state of euphoria or complete horror right now?
That feels like can I be in both at the same time?
No, you definitely can't.
I don't see why not. Like euphoric horror sounds like a great idea.
I think most CISOs are. Then that's why maybe CISO can make great founders because we used to be.
I'm going to do a little aside for our audience right now. I was making fun of Mike when he first joined on. I wish I should capture an image of this for the future. Whenever Mike first signs on to do a recording, he kind of has this look of just complete confusion of like, what have I gotten myself into? And I'm like, how many hundreds of shows have we done together, Mike? And it looks the same each time.
Because I live in that same place of euphoric horror when I'm joining this podcast, because I know it's just going to be a roller coaster from the beginning.
All right, let's go back to the topic at hand. So I think the people selling aren't getting in touch with the core needs of their customers. I think maybe that's what Yaron is trying to get at. What do you feel? Do you feel that the vendors are getting to the core needs? Some are, some aren't. Like, where are we falling here?
What you have is there's that, I need to get an initial conversation. And how do I get that initial conversation? That gives you, once you're in that conversation, that ability to understand my needs, what my problems are, what I'm trying to solve. What I'm tackling is not the same as what your own is trying to tackle. There's an 80% overlap, by all means, but that's an 80% overlap. And those are going to be addressed by broad solutions. It's that 20% that's really difficult for me to solve, for your own to solve, for any CISO out there to solve. If you're selling, how do you know what that 20% is? So it's very difficult, like putting myself in the shoes of a seller. It's not easy to know what that is. But what you need to do, and success should be measured in, do you get that initial conversation to really understand what those issues are? I'm not going to broadcast to the world what my 20% problems are, because for many reasons. But if I'm talking in a conversation with a vendor, I can start to have a little bit more clarity on what my problems are, and they can then have a little bit more of a conversation. So I guess this is a long way of saying I understand and can relate to the challenge that sales folks are having. But at the same time, just broadcasting out the same message over and over again isn't necessarily going to get to the root of the problem and really have a good, productive conversation.
Before I go on any further, I do want to tell you about our spectacular sponsor, Scrut Automation. So this company is helping businesses eliminate compliance debt and take control of risk without slowing down. That is key. So listen, managing compliance and security shouldn't be a roadblock to growth. Scrut simplifies the process with automation, AI-driven insights, and real-time monitoring, so teams can streamline audits, track security controls, and stay ahead of regulatory requirements without the manual workload. Now with Scrut, security and risk professionals can gain instant visibility into their compliance posture, automate evidence collection, and manage multiple frameworks effortlessly. AI-powered insights help teams focus on what truly matters, reducing risk, maintaining trust, and scaling with confidence. Don't let compliance slow you down. Scrut helps you stay secure, audit ready, and focused on growth. Go to their website, That is scrut.io. Let me spell that for you. SCRUT.io. Go to that website to schedule a demo or just learn more. It's scrut.io. Check them out.
Well, I guess that's one way to solve it.
Richard B. of the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation said, quote, I always like I know you have product X. My product does the same, but 1% better or has one hardly used feature. So I suggest you pay for both. And David Rawlings of Worldwide Technology said, I read your own post as more of a PSA and less of an invitation for vendors to randomly shoot their shot to hone their cold outreach skills. But maybe I misread this one. All right. So I should tell the audience that there are dozens and dozens, maybe 100 responses to this. And most of them are pitching their product and not actually having this discussion. And so Yaron was like, did I lead them the wrong way? But it was pretty clear what Yaron was saying, but I think the ball got rolling. Like a few did it and said, oh, I guess this is what we're supposed to do. And then just everyone started doing it. But that's not what you wanted, was it, Yaron?
No, but I'll own that one. I mean, that's on me. I mean, I think I should have drafted a little bit better. So I'll own that one. But I think, it's one of those things when they say no good deed goes unpunished. So, I mean, my intention was really to say, hey, make it easier for both of us. And, if you talk about the problem you're solving, it's really more efficient and easy for us to talk as opposed to, the process we're going through right now. And yes, I got bombarded by 200 messages on the post. I think I got another 300 to my work email and private email and what have you. I mean, so yeah, there was a lot. But the interesting part was that if you look at most of them, and again, they're on the post, you would see that most of them say what they do. Nobody else is almost saying what problems they're solving. So in a way, they, kind of prove my point. I really hope that the discussion is really going to help all of us, right? I mean, this is not shooting bullets at anybody. I mean, this is really, to try to help and say, look, if you want to be able to talk to us, and then we need each other, right? We need that partnership. And to make it easier for both of us, make it easier for us to understand what you're doing.
Let me ask a question, both of you, and I'll start with you, Mike. Is there a time you sort of give feedback to the vendor like, hey, this really isn't the way to approach me. It would be much better if you did this. And I know, I can't do this with everybody. I have so many hours in the day. But at one time, I'm assuming it's one of those get you at the right time. Where do you stand on that? I got to give this vendor feedback or, I'm letting this go. I don't have time or patience to get into this.
Like most things, it depends. Sometimes it genuinely is just right time. Like maybe I'm standing in some long line at Disney World and I'm just looking at my phone and a LinkedIn message comes in and I'm like, yeah, I got nothing else to do. I'll just toss a little bit of advice back to this person. But more often where it comes up is someone I've worked with at a different vendor. So maybe they've switched vendors or I've been introduced through a mutual friend. That there's some connection there that, I have a reason to engage. And genuinely, I think most humans want to be helpful. And so, I'll spend a little bit of time being helpful. The most likely scenario is I know you either directly or indirectly. And so I'll take a moment to say, hey, maybe we can clean this up a little bit, or here's a better approach.
But do you ever do this to someone you do not know at all?
I will say that there probably are a few LinkedIn private message threads that I have that genuinely happened, but it really was just pure random chance. Maybe it was something, a company that I was familiar with or a problem space that I had. So there was some familiarity there, but it's certainly not with everyone that comes through.
All right, Yaron, same question to you. At what point do you sort of engage back personally, not the way to engage right here?
Yeah, I think it's kind of going back to what Mike said, right? It's sometimes if you have the time or you're, waiting in line for something or whatever.
And you're in a good mood, maybe even?
In a good mood, yeah. Or bad mood, depends, right? I mean, or bad, yeah, it can be a bad mood too. I also want to emphasize something that Mike said about, the relationship and the trust. And this is, I think, what's important. When you build relationship with people over the years, and in our industry, we have a great community of people and people know each other and talk to each other all the time. So people genuinely want to help each other out, and they do. Obviously, I have a day job. I cannot do it all day long, and I don't. But periodically, from time to time, as Max said, some private message or something, happy to help. But there's only so much we can do.
Where do we begin?
Ross Young, who is the CISO in residence over at Teammates, said, quote, "For me, the big three questions are, what problems do you solve?" You mentioned that. Why is this an urgent issue to fix? That's a good one. And what differentiates you from vendors in the same quadrant? And we've heard that one before. That is three great questions. And heck, if you got a message or in someone explaining that, wouldn't that solve a lot, Mike?
I don't like the quadrant mention.
And by the way, same quadrant. Let me say that's hitting the issue. Let me just say in the same category. I'll say that, even though it's Ross's comment.
No. That's what I was going to say is what separates you from your competitors is a really good thing to explain. It could be cost. It could be recommendations from other customers. Like it really is a reasonable thing to answer. Like the first time I read this and thought about it, this is an urgent issue to fix. At first I was like, yeah, that's a good one. But then it dawned on me, if you're randomly hitting me out of the blue and you happen to land on something that is an urgent issue for me, I might have a bigger problem, the fact that I was just waiting for somebody to come at me with, well, here's a fix to your urgent problem. I think it's really more, the approach that I like is plant the seed. And then when I do have that issue, when I do have that challenge, I know who to come back to. And that is then more of a relationship that you can nurture over time versus you just happen to get me at the right time, because the likelihood of you doing that is very low.
By the way, I want to double down on that for a second. It's not just about you. It's about you getting the message, we're the ones who solve X. And the fact that that sticks in your brain, and if they're good at making it stick in your brain, you're going to run into other people who have the problem with X. And you go, oh, you know what? I just talked to this company and they deal with this thing. You should give them a contact. I've got a contact over there. There is enormous value to that because, CISOs talk to CISOs. Yaron, am I right on this? It's like, do you lean on that value? Like, I got to assume you've referred someone you never worked with before, but you knew what they did. You had no need for it, but a colleague mentioned they had a need.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, we do it all the time. When we have a problem, when you have a need, we reach out to the community and say, hey, what others are doing about X, right? Or whatever, the issue is. So, yeah, we do that all the time. And to your point, right, if somebody articulates well what they do and what problem they solve, and it's easy to understand what they're doing it, and they do it in a way that, like Mike said, plant the seed, build the relationship. I have a folder in my inbox that basically is called Cold Outreach to Keep. And basically, this is something that I'm just, got a cold message. It looks interesting. I recognize the problem. It's not something I have. I may need it one day, may not. I just throw it in there. And then, whatever, a year from now, maybe now there's the time to deal with that, or now I need to do something about it, or somebody asks me and say, hey, do you know anything about this? I go to this, folder. I just search for, this name or person or whatever, and I just pull it out from there. Easy.
I want to make a call out to our audience on just what you just said there. I'd be interested in, and when we post this episode, please, leave it in the comments on the LinkedIn post. I'd be interested to know from our audience is how many of you have actually laid the groundwork in terms of explaining what you do, and you got results 6 months, a year, 2 years later, like exactly what Yaron said, because I bet you the ones who do play the long game, it turns out to be quite fruitful for them. What do you guys think? Yes?
Yeah, there's actually one that comes to mind for me that I'm having a conversation with them next week or so. And it goes back to conversations that were had within some of these Slack communities a year ago. And, the person that I'm talking to actually, they're not the one who planted the seed, but they supported their customers, and their customers were happy to talk about them and happy to recommend them in a conversation that at the time I didn't really care about. Like it wasn't something that I was really worried about at the time, but I now had the problem. I went and did a search in this Slack community for prior conversations about this particular issue. And I got a short list very quick of vendors that I needed to reach out to. And that was me then going and engaging with them. And that's a far more valuable situation than them doing cold outreach randomly that they happen to get, to land into Yaron's folder. If I'm coming to your website and I'm engaging with your website, you already have the hook at that point. Yes, there's absolutely cases that come to mind for me that the seed was planted a year ago.
Well, that brings us to the very end of the show. And I'm going to ask you first, Mr. Yaron Levy, which quote was your favorite here of the handful that I read and why?
I will go with David Rowling from Worldwide Technology, who basically called me out on my comment. The way that he read my post was the right way, meaning it was a public service announcement, as opposed to, ask for pitches.
By the way, I appreciate he called that out. I thought that was quite funny, actually.
Yeah. So I think the first few comments I saw back after I posted it, I'm like, oh my God, what have I done?
Honestly, I think it was a few people took the bold choice and then the others it was like they started the snowball and it just kept rolling. All right, Mike, what was your favorite?
So I'll highlight Tim Golden's message where he talked about the 5 W's from high school.
Why being one of them?
Yes, why being one of them? The 5 Whys is back to incident root cause analysis, which is where I always go.
Right, that's a Japanese production philosophy.
Yeah, Kanban. But, the 5 W's really, I think, is something that folks should just think about. And it's a great way of very quickly explaining the situation, the item, the product, whatever it is.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show. I want to thank our sponsor, and that would be Scrut. Scrut Automation. Remember, with Scrut, you can stay aware, stay ahead, and stay compliant. So many good things for you. Just make all these sort of tough jobs around compliance and risk management a lot easier. Just go to their website. You can get a demo. You just look and research some more. Check them out. Scrut.io, SCRUT.io. Check them out. And I want to thank you, Yaron, for bringing this discussion. This is a great, great discussion. I love this. Yaron has done sort of a lot of variations of this, but what I love is that you sort of pinpoint on one element of the vendor-CISO relationship each time and let us sort of dissect it. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much for bringing it to our attention and for being part of this discussion. And Mike, thank you for crossing over to Defense in Depth and participating, being the little bit country in our little bit country and rock and roll Donnie Marie duet that we usually do.
Okay, I'm going to take that one.
Yeah, there we go. There you go. Your 1970s reference for everybody.
Deep cut.
There you go. By the way, we lost Wayne Osmond recently, I believe. One of the Osmond brothers, unfortunately, we lost. That was not the point of this, but I do want to thank our audience for your contributions and for listening to Defense in Depth.
We've reached the end of Defense in Depth. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss yet another hot topic in cybersecurity. This show thrives on your contributions. Please write a review, leave a comment on LinkedIn or on our site, CISOseries.com, where you'll also see plenty of ways to participate, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to Defense in Depth.